I miss these. So hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Thanks for pressing play once again. I'm the man they call Pixel Paul, and I've been gaming for what feels like forever now. And one of the things that I really miss, I mean, I've seen things come and go, sort of different fads, different phases, all sorts of things through the years from playing games. But one thing that I genuinely really do sort of miss, and that was a whole sort of big part of this hobby, was reading games magazines. Now games magazines have more or less now completely vanished. The internet has completely negated the need for games magazines. There's only a few sort of still remaining. Edge magazine's still going strong. Retro Gamer magazine's still brilliant. I think there's like the official PlayStation magazine still goes, but I'm assuming there is an Xbox one. But there is nowhere near as many as there used to be. I mean, I've mentioned 4 there that are possibly still going. There must have been at least 20, 25, 30 different magazines at one point for various systems. But now, like I said, with the internet, there's just no need for them. But back in the day, the early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, early noughties, gaming magazines were the one place you could go for all the sort of new news, reviews, previews, tips and cheats, guides, all that sort of thing we used to get through games magazines. So I thought, for a new sort of series for my channel, what I would do is take a little bit of a retrospective look at a few of those sort of gaming magazines. Now, I've got a couple of different magazines that I can go through, but I thought I'd start right at the beginning of which magazine I first started to read. So going back to the early 90s, my first console was the Game Boy, the Nintendo Game Boy, and the magazine I used to get all my news on the Game Boy was Total magazine. So this is a UK magazine, and yeah, this was the first sort of magazine that I used to read and buy and collect. So I thought to start off this series we'd have a look through Total magazine. Now the idea is that I'm literally just going to sit down and flip through page, look at the sort of reviews and scores that they gave to certain games back in the day, just as a little bit of a comparison, because obviously now we look back at some of these retro games with a lot of nostalgia. Sometimes we look at them with rose tinted glasses. So I just thought it'd be interesting to look at what sort of scores some of these games that we play now got back in the day, and you know, have our sort of opinions of those games changed, or are they completely different to what was in these magazines back then? So yeah, we'll have a look at some of the reviews, some of the adverts from back in the day as well. And yeah, I hope you're going to enjoy this series. So first up, like I said, is Total magazine. Okay, so here we go. This is the first magazine that I'm going to go through, and it is Total magazine, which was all about Nintendo, 100% for all players of Nintendo. And at this point we're talking about NES, Game Boy and Super NES as well, which had just sort of hit the streets around this time, which was back in May 1992. So this is issue 5, and as you can see, £1.95 this cost back in the day. £1.95. Magazines nowadays, I don't know, cost anything between sort of £7, £8, maybe £10 sometimes. But yeah, issue 5 of Total magazine. This is a proper nostalgia trip for me looking through this mag, because Total was probably the first games magazine that I sort of used to buy every month. So yeah, let's have a look through this then. So front cover, Super NES, obviously just hitting the streets as it says there. Back cover, we've got a big 1-page advert for Joe and Mac Caveman Ninja. That'll be the NES version, I would assume. But yeah, nice and colourful advert for Joe and Mac. So let's start to have a look through the magazine. So this was a UK magazine, of course, covering Nintendo. Again, second page there, or inside cover, we've got an advert for Hook, based on the game from Ocean. Again, I think this will be an NES version. I'm not sure that's the NES version there. That might be like one of the Atari or Amiga versions there. But yeah, advertising the NES and Game Boy versions of Hook. Contents page there with all the details of all of the editorial team. And you've got the 2 sort of main contributors or editorial guys, who were Steve Jarrett and Andy Dyer, who you'll see throughout the magazine. And it was, of course, published by Future Publishing. So let's start to have a look through, and the first pages are mainly talking about the Super Nintendo and having a look at what to expect from the Super NES. So we've got a look at the actual controller itself, and then a look at some of the games that will sort of launch in with it and around the time. So you've got Super R-Type there, Super Soccer, Super Mario World, of course, and a very fuzzy picture there of Pilot Wings 2. Next page, you'll see that it's quite sort of random, this magazine, a little bit. I think it was kind of aimed at more of a sort of teen market, if I want to say a teenage sort of market perhaps, possibly not one of the more what you would call grown-up magazines of the time, possibly. But yeah, you've got there some little article on a wristwatch, Nintendo wristwatch with Tetris on it. And it's these sort of things that I like in these old magazines, these old school magazines that have the adverts for, usually in these anyway, so UK companies. So here we've got Medlantic High-Tech UK Limited, video console specialist, based in Warwickshire, Bosworth. Advertising Game Boy games, all at £24. Super Nintendo games, all at £45. Can you imagine some of these games now paying for just £24 for these boxed? That would have been, yeah. Right now, some of those games are worth, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times the sort of price of £24. So yeah, interesting. They've got a little section there as well for Super Famicom Japanese imports as well. So yeah, Medlantic High-Tech. I wonder whatever happened to that company. So on the next page, we've got a look at some Game Boy games as well. You can see here that they're sort of mentioning that some of the screen grabs that they've got in this magazine are possibly a little bit blurred, and they're all in sort of your standard Game Boy green, but they're going to move to having coloured pictures and sort of merged pictures as well, and not quite as blurry. So yeah, in this magazine you'll probably notice that some of the pictures for Game Boy especially are quite blurred. Quick article bit there on Ninja Turtles 2 as well for the Game Boy and the NES. That was like the arcade game of Turtles on the NES. Next up, we've got a bit of a letters page. I won't go through all of these letters, but it'd be interesting to know if anybody ever sent a letter into Total magazine or any other magazine, and if they managed to get their letter shown in print. That'd be awesome to hear if you ever got that. Another advert there for That's Entertainment, and then a big one-page advert for what we just mentioned then, Turtles 2, the arcade game, along with some of the other Konami games at the time, Mission Impossible, can't quite read that one, Rollerball is that? Roller Games, Top Gun, and Ninja Turtles, the arcade game again there. More letters. This is quite interesting here. So another little mini advert here. I'll try and capture it there. Video Game Swap UK. Buy any other video game when you swap for only £3.50. So you can basically put in a game that you want of a value of £3.50, £7 or £10.50, and then put in the choices of games that you would like to swap. And you'd have to send it to a place not too far from me, actually, Hazel Grove, Stockport, including the following: cartridge, game instructions, order form, check, payable order. So yeah, what a way to do it. Nowadays we just do everything on eBay or CEX, but back in the day you could do something like this. Instead of actually going to a physical shop, you could send that off and put through your preferences of what you wanted to swap. I wonder if that ever took off. I don't ever remember seeing or doing that myself, so interesting. Next page, another advert, of course, for a Game Boy peripheral. I think I might have had this at one point. It's basically like a hard shell for the Game Boy. Interesting though. More adverts there, this time for Mission Impossible Konami game again. This was the NES Konami game. A bit of a, what are these? It's like pictures of that readers have sent in, so you can sort of see from that the sort of age bracket that we were looking at. But then straight in, no sort of intro to it, straight into sort of reviews as well. So the first review that we've got here is for one of my favourites, F-Zero. Some great screenshots of the game here as well. Also a little bit of blurb telling you which, what the 4 sort of vehicles do in F-Zero. And each review in total, they did like pros and cons, and their sort of rating system was done as a percentage as well. So F-Zero scored 91%, which I think is probably about fair. Yeah, I'd say at 91% is reasonable. But they used to sort of base that on looks, sounds, gameplay, and lifespan. Interesting way to do it. I can sort of get why you would maybe look at those sorts of things. Lifespan's an interesting one. But yeah, 91% for F-Zero, probably about right. Next up, we've got Super Tennis, which I think is an absolute classic. I still say this is one of the best tennis games ever made. Again, nice colourful sort of pictures of the game. The actual sort of review and text, possibly not the most sort of informative reviews, if you like, but they get the point across that, well, essentially it's a great game, and they gave it 96% as well. Next up, there was a competition for a Super NES there, and then we're moving on here to almost like the proper sort of reviews section. So this is first coming up, this is NES reviews, and we've got what a game to start with there, Super Mario Bros. 2, and they gave it 79%, which isn't a lot really. And that's what I was saying about before, is that, you know, some games didn't review particularly well back in the day, and now we look back at some of these games with, you know, maybe that nostalgia and almost rose-tinted glasses perhaps, and maybe appreciate games a little bit more now than maybe some magazines did then. I'm not saying Super Mario Bros. 2 is any much more loved than it was back then. 79% seems a little bit harsh, but, you know, I suppose Super Mario Bros. 2, it was a little bit controversial. It was massively different to the original Super Mario Bros. So, yeah, possibly 79%. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of scoring games anyway, but interesting to look back and see what magazines were giving certain games back then. So this bit is just a little bit of a retrospective of Super Mario, and obviously at this point in 1992 it doesn't go back all that far. So we start with Donkey Kong up here, Donkey Kong Jr., Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, Mario Brothers 2, Mario Brothers 3, and a little bit on Super Mario Land and Super Mario World. It's incredible to think actually just how many more Mario games we've had since 1992 really. So that would be probably have to be about 5 or 6 pages long now to do an entire look back on the Mario story. Next up, we've got New Zealand Story on the NES as well. This, of course, at this time was sort of a coin-op game or an arcade game, and this was ported to the NES. There was an Amiga version as well, I think, which was really good at the time. They gave that a really decent 93% though, so yeah, interesting. I've never played New Zealand Story. Next up, we've got Ghostbusters 2. They didn't rate this at all, 52%. Possibly a little bit harsh. I have played this, I think. And I think they've said it somewhere, yeah, far too easy. Yeah, it's quite a simple game, actually. It's not the most difficult game ever. 52%, a bit harsh, perhaps. Certainly, again, now, you know, if you were looking, well, maybe not now, but if you were looking to get this game, say, 10 or 15 years ago, and you could probably pick it up for a tenner, then you'd be sort of thinking, well, for £10, all right, it's short, but, you know, it's not a bad game. But I suppose back in the day, you were paying £35 roughly. Maybe you weren't getting your value for money. And certainly now, with how much a game like Ghostbusters is on the NES, yeah, would you be getting value for money? Who knows? Next up, we've got Rainbow Islands. Again, another sort of coin-op conversion to the NES. They gave it a nice, decent 92% there. So I think they favoured some of these arcade ports. But yeah, Rainbow Islands. Next up, Rescue the Embassy Mission. I don't remember this game, I must admit. They only scored it at 48%. But yeah, I don't really remember this game much, and I've certainly never played it or had it. Gremlins 2 on the NES. Again, I've not played this one. I played the Game Boy version, but not the NES version. 73%. Sort of average score again. Then moving on, we've got a big advert there for Amiga Power. That'll be April 1992. Parasol Stars. And then in the middle, there was a poster there. One with the NES and another one with the Game Boy. That's quite cool looking. That'd be quite nice framed, but I'm not taking it out of here. But yeah, there's the other half of the NES. Whoops, sorry, not the camera. The other half of the NES poster. Next up, we've got a good look at the Game Genie as well, this time for the NES. So the Game Genie obviously was the sort of add-on peripheral that you could use to insert sort of cheats into certain console games back then. There was one for the Game Boy as well. I think, was there one for the Mega Drive? I can't remember. I don't think there was there? I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments if there was a Game Genie for the Mega Drive. That's my first quick swig of tea. But yeah, NES Game Genie gives you an example of what it can do as well there. So like there's Batman on the NES. That's a normal jump, and there's a sort of cheat jump as well, so made a difference. But yeah, I don't think I had the NES Game Genie. I did have the Game Boy one for a little bit. Moving on, advert for Sega Power there, getting £1.95 with a Road Rash book attached to it as well. So yeah, Sega Power. Don't have any magazines of that, sadly, but maybe want to look out for, see if I can find any on eBay. Next up, we've got Game Boy reviews, and these, for some reason, Game Boy reviews are what I always remember from this magazine. I don't know why, but possibly because I was more of a Game Boy player at this point, so it was always these pages that I sort of took most sort of notice of. First, we've got Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. Brilliant game, absolutely amazing game. You can play this on Switch Online, I think. If you can't get it on Switch Online, it's certainly part of the Castlevania collection, which you can get on the PlayStation and the Xbox. But yeah, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. I do love the Castlevania games on the Game Boy. They gave it a very decent 90%. I thought it was better than the first game, to be fair. There wasn't quite as much slowdown, but slowdown was still a bit of an issue for this game. And as I mentioned before, you can see that some of these Game Boy pictures are a little bit blurred, so you don't get quite the sort of detail, but just looking at them on sort of picture form like this, it's quite sort of nostalgic again. So I am a big fan of the Game Boy, do love that machine. So 90% for Castlevania 2. Faceball 2000. Now this game's a bit of an oddity because, so they gave it 93%. They really, really raved about this game, and I know for a long time in Total Magazine, Faceball 2000 was their top Game Boy game, you know, the top rated Game Boy game. But I never saw this in the UK. I didn't ever see or get to play it or buy it or anything. I never saw this game in the UK. I don't know why. Maybe it just wasn't, you know, they didn't make a lot of them, but for some reason I just never saw this game available to buy in the UK. So yeah, Faceball 2000. A couple of puzzle games next. We've got Ishidu, gave it 68%. And then shall I call it Daedalian Opus? They gave that 45%. Obviously not too impressed with puzzle games, obviously, on the Game Boy, which is strange because puzzle games, you know, Game Boy did really, really well. Next up, we've got Turrican on the Game Boy as well. Now, they gave it 79%, as you can see there. I have played Turrican on the Game Boy, and it is not an easy game. It's a really, really detailed game. Probably the most detailed you can see it is that top screenshot there. There's so much going on in this game. It's good, but it's incredibly difficult, partly because you just can't see enough of what is going on the screen at one point. There's a lot of leaps of faith in this game as well. You can't really see where you jump into a lot of the time, and some of the enemies, you know, take quite a lot to sort of kill. So it's not a bad game, but it is a difficult game, especially on the Game Boy. Interestingly, I always remember that this game was kind of transformed, if you like, into the movie tie-in for Universal Soldier as well. So there was a Universal Soldier game on the Game Boy, but basically it was Turrican, just with a slightly different looking character, and obviously Universal Soldier box art as well. It wasn't any better though. Next up, two games. So we've got Asteroids, the GB version of the arcade classic Asteroids, and they weren't impressed again, 55% there. And then The Hunt for Red October, so the game based on the Sean Connery movie, Hunt for Red October. I see this around quite often, actually, this game. Usually cartridge only, but I do see it around quite a lot. They only gave it, let's move that there, 40% though. They said it was a bit boring. Interesting though, because, yeah, was it boring? I don't really know. I don't think it was that bad, but yeah, they weren't impressed with it. Next up, and this is a good game, 91%. I'd say that's probably fair. Dr. Franken. I do love this game. I've still got this game, a boxed version of it as well. Incredible music in it. I think they've put there actually neat half a scored music and the visual blasting effects. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, but you know, it's basically one sort of tune playing all the way through this game. But I do love Dr. Franken. I think it's a great sort of semi sort of Metroidvania type game. Incredibly detailed graphics. It does suffer a huge amount from slowdown though. As the main character, Frankie, sort of moves along from left to right, the screen blur is pretty horrendous in this, which is a bit of a shame really, because like I say, the graphics for the Game Boy are really, really detailed. I'm hoping this does show up on the footage. But yeah, it's still a very good game. I still like Dr. Franken. Moving on, that's all of the reviews in this issue. We've got a big advert here for Star Trek 25th Anniversary on the Game Boy, interestingly. And then moving on, we've got what is basically a sort of cheats section, so Total Tactics they called it. It's basically loads of cheat codes for Game Boy games and NES games. Low G-Man, I might have to remember those because I've got Low G-Man still, so I might check some of those out. We've got a whole sort of map screen done of Fortified Zone. Again, this is a Game Boy game. I've got Fortified Zone. There's only 4 stages in the whole of this game. It's not a huge game, so yeah, if you'd need a map, I think you're struggling as a gamer probably, but interesting how they've done it. Nicely done. Next up is Maniac Mansion. So again, they kind of done whole sort of layouts of not levels, because it wasn't really a level game, was it? It was more of a one sort of big, well, mansion that you had to sort of almost Metroidvania your way around. So, but yeah, interesting way of doing it. It does actually sort of follow through. So yeah, interesting. Maniac Mansion was quite a good game actually. More sort of text there, very text heavy that page there, with more sort of tips and tricks for Maniac Mansion. Some more sort of cheat codes there as well. Castlevania 2, Kid Icarus, Life Force. I'm assuming that's Life Force Salamander on the NES. I would assume so. Nemesis as well. That's a good game on the Game Boy. Next up, Super Mario Bros. 2 sort of walkthrough, if you like. You know, even though they slagged it off, they've done a bit of a walkthrough for you. Yeah, interesting. Next, there's a Q&A section, so a bit like sort of Games Master, I guess, you know, where you would ask them for help with a certain game, perhaps, or ask them for any cheats and that sort of thing. So yeah, Q&A, quite good. A big one-page advert there for Kickoff, and there was also a Super NES. Oh, there it is, Super NES version of Super Kickoff as well. Not my most favourite football game ever. I think I've got Kickoff on the Mega Drive, and for me, it was always a bit of a poor man's Sensible Soccer, but still, you know, it's not a terrible game or anything like that. Game Boy version was not very good though. Then, towards the back of the magazine is almost like an appendix of all the reviews they've done so far. So this bit's for the NES, starting from A Boy and His Blob there, Batman. I won't go through all of these again, but Blue Shadow. Gosh, a lot of these games do ring a lot of bells with me. Gumshoe, I've got that. DuckTales, which is a classic. I only gave it 3 out of 5 though. Gauntlet, Isolated Warrior, another one I've got. Well, they gave that 4 out of 5, which is quite decent. Power Blade, they only gave that 2. Now that's a surprise, because Power Blade's not a bad game. Interesting, that one. Low G-Man, 5 out of 5. Robocop there. More NES games here. Solar Jetman, which I nearly picked up not that long ago. What else have we got here? Ski or Die, Skate or Die, Smash TV. Smash TV, 4 out of 5. Wasn't the easiest game to play on the NES, that one. Legend of Zelda, they gave 4. Legend of Zelda 2, they gave 4 as well, which is interesting, because it's not everybody's favourite version of Zelda. WrestleMania Challenge, they only gave 2, which doesn't surprise me, because it wasn't that great, sadly. Then the Game Boy section of it, Batman, great game, that one, again. Bure Fighter, I like Bure Fighter. Castlevania there. These ones in big boxes, usually the ones that they've given sort of 5 out of 5. So you've got Bart Simpson, Escape from Camp Deadly, which is a bit generous, I think, because it's not that great. Bill and Ted, Chessmaster, Dynablaster, which was essentially Bomberman on the Game Boy. DuckTales on the Game Boy as well, they gave 4. Oops. F1 Race, Golf, Nemesis, Othello, Revenge of the Gator, that's a decent pinball game. Mario Land, of course. Tennis. Turtles for the Foot Clan, they gave that 5 out of 5. Yeah, I mean, it's Full of Foot Clan is not a bad game, but it's exceptionally easy, like really, really easy. You will play that in one go and finish it quite simply. So, you know, when you look back at some of the other reviews saying you're not going to get much value for money, well, You know, they gave that one 5 out of 5, so that's interesting. Little review section there of sort of peripherals and joysticks that you can get. I've actually got 2 of those B-shoe zippers there for the NES. I haven't got that pink one. I've got a yellow one and a green one. So yeah, they gave that 5 out of 5, and I'd agree with that. It's a decent little controller for the NES, that. And we're getting towards the end of the mag, so we've got here like a subscription section, and then just a quick preview of next month. So next month they're looking at Turtles 2 on the Game Boy, looking at R-Type, Super R-Type on the Super NES, as well as Super Soccer. So yeah, 2 games that they were going to review next. And then more adverts here for Game Boy games, Super NES games, not many to choose from there at that point. NES games as well. Some interesting prices amongst these here. But yeah, NES Action's at £99.99, or the Mario Brothers set $79.99. Obviously the Super Nintendo coming out was starting to affect the price of the NES at this time, so these were starting to come down dirt cheap. And I think this was around the time probably that I got my NES, because it had come down in price quite a lot really. So yeah, interesting. Like I said, looking at these sort of old prices and adverts, Special Reserve, they were sort of a long time sort of a games club, if you like, and they used to do adverts in these magazines quite a lot. So that was your look at Total issue 5 from May 1992. That was a look through Total magazine from May 1992, back in the day. Yeah, proper nostalgia trip, that one. I really used to love this magazine as a kid. It was probably written in the style that sort of would appeal to that sort of demographic at the time. So you know, it's not the most in-depth magazine ever, but it is what it is, and I used to love it, and I still like looking through it now. So yeah, Total magazine, that's the first one covered. I am planning to do some more of these type of videos, make it a bit of a series for the channel. I've got issues of Games TM to look through, Super Play, which was a fantastic magazine. I've got a few American kind of magazines as well, which I think I bought at a car boot sale not that long ago, so we could go through those. And I'm probably looking to look to maybe add some magazines as well, see if I can get some Sega magazines, and just see what else is out there, and have a look and a bit of a nostalgia trip through those magazines as well. So hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comments, give the video a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, if you can hit that subscription button, that would be appreciated too. And as ever, thanks for watching, and I shall see you next time.